Hello, hello. This is Joanna with Blissful Baby Sleep Coaching, and this is your Get Your Life Back. It starts with sleep. I go live here on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. I want to let you know that next week I'm not going to be here. I'm actually going to take some family time and some self care time. Uh, and so I am not going to be here next week, which is August 6th. But that's okay because you can um, add me some comments here and I'll get back to you in the feed, or you can always submit questions while I'm gone and then I will answer them for you when I am back live on August 13th. Okay, so again, this is Joanna with Blissful Baby Sleep Coaching. I'm so happy that you are here joining me today. Um, would love to hear who's here before I start jumping into answering some questions and speaking on a couple of topics I thought would be relevant and helpful to all of you today. Um, let's see, and I am so sorry, you guys. My phone has been ringing off the hook today, and so I want to put that away so that I don't get distracted. All right, so I'm going to just jump right in. I have a question today, a really great question that has lots of components to it that I'm going to speak to you about. This is a question from Katrine, who is in Washington State, and she has a 5.5 month old baby, and she has been attempting some nap training and also dabbling with some nap coaching. And so I want to kind of read to you a little bit of what she's experiencing, because I think a lot of you will absolutely relate to her frustration and her confusion as to why some of the things she's trying is not working. So she has a great routine. Again, this is a 5.5 month old baby. And she's attempting, okay, so the first thing I want to say is that she, at least from as far as what I can tell in the form that she filled out, she's attempting to do nap training. Okay. Now, let me be really clear about something about night training versus nap training. Okay, good. She is here. Husband and wife are here. Okay, great. So you guys, I'm going to be clarifying the difference between night training and nap training, because I think that will be a really great beginning of how I can answer your questions. Okay, so here's what, just to kind of lay the foundation for what I'm going to help Katrine with. This will help everybody understand. Night training a baby with sleep coaching, where you focus on nights so that your child can go to bed into the crib drowsy but awake at the onset of sleep, so that they can then begin to self-soothe back to sleep in the middle of the night after any arousals that do not require a feeding for nutritional needs. Okay, so she has a 5.5 month old baby, so the likelihood is that she might still do one nutritional feed a night, unless she's gotten permission from her pediatrician to drop that feed. But I'm going to make an assumption right now that with a 5.5 month old baby, the likelihood is that she's definitely doing a bedtime feed, and she's probably doing one nutritional feed in the middle of the night, where that means that the child is like legitimately hungry and she's able to bring him to the breast, do a beautiful nutritional nurse, and then be able to put him down. And then he would typically stay asleep. So that is, to me, like a definition of a truly nutritional nurse. What she's saying right now in the feed is that she actually wants to do no nighttime feeds if at all possible, which is great. So that helps me clarify what I'm going to say. So again, what the goal of nighttime sleep coaching is that you want the child to be able to go into the crib drowsy but awake, 5 or 6 on the drowsy scale, so that they can begin to regulate, settle, and soothe themselves to sleep at the onset of sleep, at bedtime, at the bright sleep window, after great daytime naps. Okay, so the thing that I need to like really have you guys understand is that creating the right circumstances and the right environment for your child to learn and practice their sleep skills at the onset of sleep at bedtime, there's a lot of preparation that has to go into all of that being the right circumstance and right condition for your child to practice that night their sleep skills. Okay. And what I mean by drowsy but awake is this is kind of what I call my sleepy scale. 1 is your child's wide awake, 10 is your child's dead asleep. When the child really it has their sleep skills mastered, they are very easily able to go into their crib drowsy but awake, 5 or 6 on the drowsy scale, and they can regulate, settle, and soothe themselves all the way asleep without anybody doing anything to and for them. That's when they totally have nailed their sleep skills at the onset of sleep. Okay. When they have nailed those sleep skills at their onset of sleep at bedtime, it is much, much easier for them to be able to use those same settling and soothing behaviors in the middle of the night after they have a partial arousal. So she has a 5.5-month-old baby, and babies that are 5.5 months, they can have an arousal every 90 to 110 minutes all night long, where they are up and slightly disoriented and typically deregulated. They'll wake up crying and they'll want some kind of support to go back to sleep. But when you go into sleep coaching mode, you are really trying to create that optimum circumstance and environment for them to not only practice their sleep skills at the onset of sleep under those conditions that I mentioned are optimal, but that you are consistent in how you give them the optimal conditions in the middle of the night in order to use those same sleep skills to go back to sleep after their numerous partial arousals all night, unless you're also doing a nutritional nurse, which is perfectly fine. So when we're looking to do sleep coaching with like a 5.5-month-old baby, one of the big things is that, as you guys have heard me say multiple times, that the newborn phase in the world of sleep science is considered 0 to 6 months. So technically, her child is still clearly and squarely in the newborn phase, where then before we do any sleep coaching, we kind of have to ask ourselves, is this child truly showing readiness for independent sleep? Because sometimes, even though we want them sleeping through the night, sometimes they're just not ready to do it yet. And so what I'm always looking for when I'm working with clients is with the younger babies is this child truly showing readiness for independent sleep? One of the ways I can look for that with a younger baby is, do they have full command on being able to roll from front to back and back to front? Because if he's able to do that, then that is a good sign of readiness. The other good sign of readiness is that, have you seen him be able to go back to sleep in the middle of the night without any support? Which she said, yes, that has happened. So that's good. In fact, she said she's even had some successes where he's fallen asleep at the onset of sleep at bedtime and been able to stay asleep all night long. So that's awesome. And she just said he can roll both ways. So, and everyone, Katrine, like when I'm answering your question, I'm also doing it as answering it, kind of giving a point of context, and so that everybody can relate based on where they are with their child and what the variables are to consider. So what Katrine is saying to me is like, okay, he's 5.5 months old, but he's showing readiness for nighttime coaching. He's able to roll both ways, which is great. And he's also demonstrated a couple of times to be able to go back to sleep in the middle of the night without any support. And in fact, we've even had one night where he did it all by himself, which is awesome. Okay, so that means that she had mentioned in her form here that sometimes, though, some nights she can have a really successful night that he can go to sleep independently at bedtime and then sleep all night and consolidate all his arousals and not need any feeds. That's awesome. So now we have to start replicating that environment, because what can happen by accident is that on a good night, things are great, but on a bad night, where maybe he's a little bit more having more disruptive sleep, is that if you go back in and you start offering crutches again, then you're creating inconsistencies, which by accident trains the baby to cry. And we definitely don't want that. We want to offer the consistency so the baby always has a pattern that they can depend upon on how we're going to respond. Okay. So So the first thing you need to do before you ever move on to nap training is you have to really make sure that your child is truly night trained, meaning consistently can they do drowsy but awake at bedtime at the appropriate sleep window and go into that crib 5 or 6 on the drowsy scale and regulate, settle, and soothe to sleep? And are they able to link their arousals all night? And and are they sleeping at 5.5 months old? Typically 10.5 to 11.5 hours consolidated sleep is what we're looking for. And once they start doing that consistently at night, for at least 5 nights in a row, that then opens up a new window of opportunity to begin to help them nap train, which is kind of where I think Katrine and her husband are right now. They're like, okay, we think we've got night train down, which is great. But I would really encourage you, Katrine, to double make sure you've got about 5 nights in a row under your belt where you've been really consistent with him doing drowsy but awake at bedtime, and really consistent that he's linked all his arousals in the middle of the night by himself. And then that then creates a situation where we can start to nap train. And when we nap train, we have to kind of do a modified bedtime routine before morning nap. So the morning nap is the easiest one to learn how to sleep train. Okay. So it is totally acceptable and fine to do nap training in segments. So in other words, a child that's 5.5 months old will typically take 3 naps a day. And in fact, most babies will take 3 naps a day until they're about 9 or 10 months of age. So in Katrine's situation, she may choose to just focus on nap number 1 for sleep training and get the child to do that independently while simultaneously crutching for nap number 2 and nap number 3. Because the thing that's tricky about nap training is that when you nap train, you often create more sleep disturbances during the nap cycle until the child really masters it again. And in that disturbance, we often compromise the amount of daytime sleep the child is getting. And as you all know, that lack of daytime sleep causes more crying at bedtime and causes more unusual arousals in the middle of the night. So it's one of these really tricky things when we start getting a child sleeping through the night and we're comfortable and confident with their skill set, that when we begin to ask them to use that during nap training, we don't want to move too fast, and too boldly, because if we do, then our daytime sleep crumbles, which then triggers a whole bunch of problems again in the night. So one of the things I'm going to recommend that you do, Katrine, is maybe just focus on morning nap training for morning nap, which I'm going to tell you what to do, and let your child get really good at that. And in the meantime, you can crutch him with whatever sleep crutches you had before for nap number 2 and nap number 3. And then once he's mastered morning nap, then you can move on to nap number 2 and do some nap training around that. And then once he's really comfortable and confident with getting 2 really good naps a day independently, then you can move on to nap number 3. However, most moms that I meet that have a young one like this, they will always keep nap number 3 as kind of a crutch on the go nap so that they have flexibility to put the baby in the car, stroller, wear them, do a little power nap with them, and just leave that as an option to be more flexible and not have to always have 3 naps a day in the crib. Okay, because I know sometimes that can be hard and limiting from a scheduling standpoint. So what's happening with the morning nap is that I don't think you're giving enough time for him to figure it out. So in other words, she's saying, let me read to you what her concerns are and what she's doing, and then you guys will understand. She says she's trying to do drowsy but awake, but then he wakes up crying, and then we've been trying cry it out for 30 minutes or so. But then mommy guilt pops in, and So he ends up on the breast, but when he ends up on the breast and he bites and compresses my nipples and it really hurts, totally understand that. It does super hurt. We come back in and try to calm him down. He gets really drowsy, but when we lay him back down, he, wakes up again, and on we go. Right? I mean, how many of us have had that experience where we put with babies asleep, we put them down, and the transfer fails? It's like, you just want to. So frustrating. So she actually says here, I'm super tired. I'm really frustrated. I find that I'm spending a lot of time with naps in the rocking chair for an hour or more. And she's wanting to just have the nap training go well, since the night training is proving to go well. So this is what we're going to do. So again, setting the stage. You do not want to nap train until you have night trained. So that's like super important, because again, the easiest time for a child to learn their sleep skills is at the onset of sleep at bedtime, then learn those sleep skills in the middle of the night on non-feeding arousals. So once they have that, then the best way to nap train is this. You want to make sure that you really understand their sleep window at the onset of sleep for nap number 1 in the morning. You want to make sure you're separating the eating from the sleeping by at least 5 or 10 minutes. And you want to integrate like a book or a song in between. So what you're going to do is go into your dimly lit room and basically do a modified bedtime routine for nap number 1. And you want to make sure that you're in the room and feeding, if that's what you choose to do. If your schedule is such that you might give them a little snack before the nap, that you're separating the eating from the sleeping by at least 5 or 10 minutes, and that your child is truly drowsy but awake, 5 or 6 on the drowsy scale when they go into the crib. And since you've been night training with your child, you would know what drowsy but awake really looks like. Because remember, if you put the child in too drowsy, they will always, always cry louder, longer, and harder. And again, I'm a gentle sleep coach. So my whole goal in orientation is to always find all the tiniest, most important ways that we can minimize tears and minimize frustration. And really nailing that sleep window makes a tremendous difference, because your child has more emotional bandwidth to regulate, settle, and soothe when they're more awake than when they're sliding down the sleepy scale. Like if they're an 8 or an 8.9 or 9.5 drowsiness, they're exhausted. They're running on fumes. They do not have the emotional bandwidth to learn a new skill when they're that drowsy, which is why having them go in sooner is more important. So for the nap training, you can do a modified sleep lady shuffle where you put your child in awake, and for the first 3 days, you can be by the crib, offer opportunity to regulate them. Okay. And remember, when you're sleep training, your goal is to be the regulator, not the sleep crutcher. And the question comes, and the $1,000,000 question becomes, what is it that my child wants from me in terms of regulation, the ability to help them down regulate versus crutching? And one thing that Katrine had said in all caps is, she said, there is, let's see, where was that? Yeah, right here. She says, there is literally no amount of shushing, patting, singing that calms him down to stop crying. Okay. He escalates when he is picked up. He sometimes stops crying immediately. And etc. Right? So that is the $1,000,000 question: is what is it that I can do as the caregiver to help my child down regulate so that they can begin to self-settle and self-soothe themselves from a calmer state. So for some babies, they're very sensitive, and they really are, they will reject all your attempts to calm them down, because they're looking at you and they're saying, the only thing I want from you right now is the sleep crutch, and that any amount of talking, touching, picking up, or patting actually just agitates, overstimulates, and irritates them. And that's why they're crying. So sometimes what happens to families is they say, oh, sleep coaching doesn't work for my baby, or I'm never going to be successful with this because every single time I've tried, I've gotten this miserable response. And when we look more deeply about exactly what they did, what the conditions were when they tried things, it became very evident that, oh my gosh, I'm afraid that this has not been recording. Oh my gosh. Can you guys hear me? I didn't even realize this was plugged in. I thought I had unplugged it. Okay, well, tech. Got to check my tech before I start. Okay, so why does a child reject your ability to help them? Because some babies are so stubborn that they're like, do not touch me unless you're going to crutch me. They literally were like, no, don't touch me unless you're going to pick me up and rock me or nurse me or hold me or do something for me to take me all the way to Dreamtown. And that's the tricky part of what sleep training is you're there to help your child down regulate. You're not there to help them get more drowsy or go all the way to Dreamtown. And so sometimes the inconsistent way that you are trying to soothe them, meaning too many pickups, too many put downs, too much padding, too much talking, creates the opposite where your child just gets highly overstimulated, very frustrated, very confused, and all they do is cry. So I have a feeling that that is kind of what's happening with you, that despite your very best loving efforts to try to help downregulate him, he's rejecting those efforts because it's too much for him. It's too stimulating. It's too confusing. So sometimes in those situations, what we have to do is simply sit in the room, typically on the ground where we're not as much in view. We might use some occasional mantra like I love you or night night. We might use some occasional shushing or oming. Or maybe we don't say anything at all. But the good news is you're probably thinking, oh, but that feels right. I'm just sitting there witnessing my child crying. But here's the thing, you guys, sometimes they literally cry less, because the less you do, the less overstimulated they get, the less confused they are by your efforts. That the crying was not because they don't know how to go to sleep, but the crying was because they were overstimulated. So when you do less from the onset, they don't have a reason to get highly deregulated because they didn't get that frustrated. And remember, when you're in the room, they still can smell you, they can still sense you, and they can still see you. So they still are getting a lot of support from you. And the most important thing is keeping calm yourself when you're present in the room, because children absolutely unequivocally feel your stress and anxiety, and they will ramp up and cry more when they're sensing your own personal frustration and anxiety in the situation. The other thing I want to mention is that sometimes if you're a nursing mom and you're the one doing the nap coaching, even if you've been successful with night coaching, that sometimes being the nursing mom is just too intense for you to be in the room, because they literally can smell you. And if in the past they had been nursed to sleep, and that was kind of like their foundational sleep crutch that took them all the way to Dreamtown, the smell of you drives them insane, and they will just cry and cry and cry, hoping that the breast will make an appearance. And so sometimes with nap training, for sure, we have to move out of the room sooner than we want to, because that dynamic's going on. Or you might have to switch caregivers and have your husband kick off the nap training. And since the weekend's coming, maybe that might be a good opportunity for you guys to take, to take the weekend and have dad focus on morning nap. And if morning nap goes really well with him doing it, then I would say, then great, move on to second nap, right? So you don't have to stage out your nap training. It's just sometimes a good idea the first couple of days just to help your child learn those skills at the easiest time. And then once they start showing you that they can do nap number one, then it's kind of nice to then move on to nap number two.
but you don't have to do both at the same time if you just don't have it in you. Okay, so I want to let you know this is something you can customize for yourself. The other thing is that if you were feeling, mom, because I know you said that you guys have been trying this for about 3 to 5 weeks. That's the other thing I want to mention here. Really effective sleep coaching, when you're doing it in a way that really helps them anchor their sleep skills at the onset of sleep at bedtime, so they can do it in the middle of the night, so then they can translate those skills to naps, really shouldn't take more than 3 weeks at this age. Now, of course, the older the baby is and the more ingrained the sleep crutches are, the longer it can take. Okay. But we're talking about a 5.5-month-old baby, and she says she's been at this for 3.5 weeks and there's been a lot of crying. So what I would recommend, mom, is that if you're feeling really overwhelmed by nap training and you're like, wow, I've been in this sleep coaching mode for way too long. I'm really tired. I'm really confused. I'm feeling stressed out and worn out. Then maybe the thing to do, and again, he's young, you guys. So remember, we're talking about readiness, right? Sometimes just because they're ready to do night training doesn't mean they're ready to do nap training when they're this young. So maybe the thing you could consider doing, just as an option, is kind of go back to basics and make sure that he really has his sleep skills down at night. And in the meantime, go back to crutching at naps. Take a break for like a week, maybe 2 weeks, cool everything down. And what I mean by that is cool down any power struggle that has started to evolve between you and your baby, because you've been stressed out and he's probably wondering, like, what's happening today when you put me down. So just cool everything down by going back and using sleep crutches for naps. Focus on the night. Make sure you've got that totally dialed in, that you can see him actively practicing his sleep skills, regulate, settle, soothe at the onset of sleep at bedtime, and that you're nailing the sleep window, because you've got to know that. You've got to get really clear on how to nail his sleep window. Then you could go back and start nap training again in another week or 2, and just start with morning nap, and maybe kick it off on a weekend when dad can be in charge of doing it. And that might get you in a whole different position, and maybe your child would be a little bit older and a little bit more readiness, and that the power struggle will have had time to diminish, and dad could do some reading up. So again, you guys know that I'm a gentle sleep coach, so I do not believe in cry it out. I trained with Kim West, who wrote Good Night, Sleep Tight. Okay, this book, this is her newest edition that just came out. I said, again, she's been a sleep coach for 25 years, I think. So this is, I think, her 3rd edition of the book, international bestseller, Sleep Ladies, Good Night, Sleep Tight by Kim West. What I'm going to recommend, if you, Katrine, want to go at this alone for nap training, then what I would recommend is I would reread the section on understanding tears, so that you had a very clear understanding about your role as being the coach. Especially dad should read this too, especially if he's going to take on the nap training role, which might be a great kickstart since you're a nursing mom and your child might be just really frustrated by being able to smell you. So you want to read Understanding Tears, which is page 1213. And then I would read the section on 6-month-olds. And especially pay attention to the suggestions around nap training. And I would follow it by the book on that. So the thing about nap training, it sometimes can be more difficult than night training. And sometimes it can take longer than night training. Okay. Okay, good. She says she has the book. So that is what I'm going to recommend, Katrine, for how you're going to address nights and naps. I don't want you to get frustrated. I want you to don't say, oh my gosh, I made some mistakes, or oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been doing this for so long and it hasn't worked. Again, he's a younger one. Sometimes the readiness is not quite 100% there. And then if you give a little bit of breathing room, sure enough, in 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes they're like a completely different baby. The other thing you've got to be really careful of when you're doing some coaching with these younger ones is that 4 to 5 month sleep regression is a real thing. And during the 4 to 5 month sleep regression, what is normal and customary, unfortunately, is nap resisting and bizarre middle of the night arousals and lots of crying and clinginess. And so if he hasn't yet gone through that milestone, then there's a possibility you could be getting the tail end of this while you're trying to night train and nap train, which would mean and make perfect sense why it's not sticking and holding the way it typically would if you'd already gone through the milestone. So that's something else to consider. That's another reason, like when I'm talking to moms of the younger ones, is I want to see, have they gone through the milestone? Because if they haven't, I always say, hold on. I wouldn't do any nap training or night training, because a lot of how they act before versus how they act after that milestone, it's two really different babies. And I can tell you that during the milestone, oh my gosh, sleep can just be so, so difficult. And it's not because you're a bad mom or that your child's a bad sleeper or that they'll never figure it out. It's just that it's the rolling milestone causes massive sleep disruptions. Again, the telltale signs are, number one, during the day, you'll see your child crying a lot, being really clingy and being really cranky. You'll probably notice that they won't be as hungry for their feeds. You'll notice a lot of crying at bedtime. You'll notice some unusual arousals in the middle of the night where they can't be consoled. Not even like a nursing would sometimes works to console them. And the arousals, they'll be awake longer, and you have to work a lot harder to help them go back to sleep. It's a very difficult time, but it's also an amazing time when they go through these milestones, because on the other end of it, they're going to master, they're moving on, which means that you've been doing all the right things because your child is able to move on to those milestones. So it's actually a good thing, but we just have to be realistic about what life is going to look like for some babies when we're parenting them during these, first 10, the 10 milestones that happen in the first 20 months of life. Okay, so let me see if there's any other questions that Katrine had on her form here. Yeah, so she did say that that normally he's sleeping through the night, but if he does wake up, she breastfeeds him to sleep. So that's the tricky one, Katrine. Remember, consistency. You can't really be in a situation where sometimes you feed in the middle of the night and sometimes you don't, because you're turning on and off the hunger clock, and you're also giving your child an inconsistent response on what will happen in the middle of the night. Are you going to let him cry, or are you going to feed him? And the reality is that when you're dabbling with feeding him sometimes to avoid the crying, then when he does wake up and you don't feel like feeding him, you've actually trained him to cry for the feed. So we don't want that to happen. So you might want to go back to really evaluate how deeply he's actually learned his nighttime sleep skills before you continue on the naps. Anyway, yeah, so I think that we got to cover a lot of really important information in this Facebook Live. Just this concept that always looking for a child's readiness before you start sleep coaching. Don't start sleep coaching when a child has a developmental milestone about to come, or if you're in the middle of one. It's always better to night train before you nap train. And nap training can sometimes be harder than night training. And if you're a nursing mom, sometimes it's better if dad helps you, because the child really can smell you, and that can cause them to become very overstimulated and cry more because of that. And again, we are always looking for ways to minimize crying. So I hope that this has been really helpful to you today. If there are any other questions before I close out, I'd love you to pop in and ask them. Those of you that are listening on the replay, absolutely, if you do hashtag replay, and ask a question, I will be able to scan that and look for your question and be sure to answer it. Those of you that want to submit questions in the future, I'm going to actually put that link right in here. This is the link that I'm posting for people. Sorry, sometimes hard to do things while I'm talking and going live. So if you want to, the next one is going to be on August 13th. I'm not going to be going live next week. I'm going to be practicing what I preach, which is some self-care and time with my family before school starts, which I know is going to be a very bizarre year because I'm here in California and it looks like everybody's going to be remote, or at least in my county, it's all going to be remote, but that doesn't mean that it's still not school. And that we've got to get up and be alert and be organized and on time and all that good stuff. So it's going to take a whole new level of parenting, and I've got to be ready to give it my all. So let me just see if there's any other questions. But no, I think we are good. Okay, so the last question she asked is, should we stay by him at night? Because let me see, here's her question. Should we stay by him at night then because we let him cry self to sleep? Okay. All right. So a little bit hard for me to understand exactly at what stage of the night you're talking about. But if he's doing really good, drowsy but awake at the onset of sleep at bedtime, you can absolutely stay in the room until he falls asleep and then stay long enough until he's dead asleep before you leave the room. If he wakes up in the middle of the night and you want to sit with him, that's great. Again, I think that you've noticed that a lot of touching doesn't help. So maybe your physical presence will help him, but you might find that even your physical presence is too much. So I would say go ahead and sit in the room. Give it 2 or 3 nights. If you find and you can tell, like, oh my gosh, all he does is cry and stare at me, then it means, again, that even your physical presence is too much. And so therefore, dad might want to be the one to do the sitting. That might be better for your child. And also you're saying that he's crying himself to sleep. Okay, so again, I don't believe in cried out, right? So crying yourself to sleep, I mean, you want to see your child regulate, settling, and soothing. So if you're not seeing them down regulate via some settling, and settling behaviors look like they stand up, he's only 5.5 months, but they roll around, they flap their legs, they scratch the mattress, they move their head around, they sometimes look for their lovey. That's settling. Soothing is they tend to sometimes whine or mumble. They'll grab their lovey, they'll smack their lips. They might still be whimpering, but it's more of like a complaining rather than a crying. You want to see them cycling like that. You want them to see, like, I'm settling, I'm soothing, I'm settling, I'm soothing. If it's just him crying until he passes out, what that tells me is that your child went into the crib way too drowsy to begin with, and they just didn't have the emotional resilience to learn how to regulate, settle, soothe, and they just stayed highly deregulated until they crashed out. And unfortunately, that's not teaching them sleep skills. That's just teaching them how to cry really hard till they crash out. So I would go back to reevaluating your sleep window and make sure you're not getting him too drowsy on the breast for the bedtime feed, and allow him to work on his sleep skills at the onset of sleep. And you can absolutely stay in the room, but stay in there long enough till he is dead asleep. And the same thing would be in the middle of the night. Okay, so thank you so much for everybody, and take care. And I will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.